and I kept losing everything. I lost my phone, I lost my AirPods, my sandals broke. Everything was just going wrong, and everything was just going right at the same time. It was a magical experience, I would say, for sure. As crazy as it sounds, everything that I have done, everything that has happened to me to travels, which mostly has been great, has taught me and really showed me a completely different life in some ways that I'm really grateful for. Yeah, travel has definitely been cheaper than me living in the U.S. in a city like Los Angeles, for example. Definitely. I really struggled with that at the beginning. It is not easy for sure. It's not the norm. That is terrifying for me. Whatever happens, happens. I'm gonna say yes to this. The loneliness will start kind of kicking in a little bit heavier. And yeah, that sometimes it became a little bit difficult to handle. But when you're doing all of these beautiful things around the world, it's also nice to look to your side and have someone to share it with, right? Like, it was incredible, right? And I was like mind blown. And I think that moment's when it kind of settled for me. I was like, wow, this is my life. This is insane. This is one of my probably my favorite memory of starting this crazy journey for sure.
Shall we get started?
Let's do it.
Great. Well, welcome to the SAFAROTO podcast. Today I'm excited to be welcoming my good friend, Emiliano. Emiliano and I met 2.5 years ago, actually, in August of 2022 in Croatia. Less than a month later, we met again in Ireland to do a road trip together. Fun
Yep.
road trip.
Yes.
Since then, we have been to 12 countries together in 6 different continents. And I look forward to more travels and more exploration together in different parts of the world. So, Emiliano, welcome to the SAFAROTO podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to do this.
So, Emiliano, you've been traveling for a few years. Do you mind sharing with us what led you to adopt this travel lifestyle and what it's been like for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think when COVID hit, I was living in Los Angeles, California at the time. I had been living there for about 7 years or so, and I mean, obviously, COVID shut everything down. I've been working with the same company by then for about maybe 5 years at that point. So, I think when COVID shut everything down, people kind of started spreading out, right? I stayed mostly in Los Angeles during that time, but COVID really hit me. I was living by myself. I didn't really have a lot of people, like a big community around me necessarily. I've always kind of been in smaller communities. So I think the fact that I wasn't able to go anywhere, really travel outside of the city lines to some extent, I think really affected me. I also, um, I also we just been wanting to travel right before COVID hit. So it was ironic that obviously everything got shut down right when I wanted to. I was looking into this program. I remember right around COVID, right before COVID, that was remote year. It's called, and it allows you to travel with a group of people for 1 year as a digital nomad. Yeah, and it's basically 12 countries in 12 months, so a country per month, and they provide all the accommodations, they provide the co-working spaces and everything like that. And I actually signed up, and I was talking to some other, the people working at the organization to see when I can join a trip, and then obviously COVID shut everything down. So I already had that urge, I guess, to travel, to go explore a little bit of the world. My job wasn't remote before COVID, or not fully remote. It was like more hybrid, 4 days a week, maybe 3 days a week. But after COVID, obviously, it turned hybrid, and after the pandemic kind of started, simmering down a little bit, and uh, I just took the opportunity, man. I told myself, my lease was coming up on my apartment. I remember that I was like, okay, am I gonna sign another year, right? because in the U.S. it's all based on that, right? You sign a year lease and that's it. You're kind of stuck there for a year, or am I gonna take this opportunity to go travel? And um, basically, right before, maybe 3 months before my lease ended, I decided that I was gonna do it. I was gonna go travel, and I was gonna sell everything in my possession, basically. Um, and selling everything took, I mean, I started like a month before I left, but the last 2 weeks was like when I really got rid of most of my stuff. I was like slowly kind of getting rid of a few things here and there, donating a bunch of stuff as well. Yeah, the last 2 weeks, I kind of sold everything else, my car, all of my kitchen stuff, bedding, everything I mean, my apartment was completely empty. And that was the most liberating feeling that I probably ever felt. Me as a somewhat of a minimalist, I could not be happier to have done that process. It was difficult and stressful at the time, but super liberating. And yeah, I mean, I just decided to kind of travel a little bit in the U.S. and then went to Canada, and from Canada went to Portugal, and that was basically the official beginning of my nomadic lifestyle. I guess I would say.
Wonderful. So you mentioned something that I find is fairly common amongst digital nomads and people who have this kind of travel lifestyle of going around the world is that concept of minimalism. And a lot of times when people ask whether, how to do it, and they're uncertain on whether it would be a good fit for them, being a minimalist and not being attached to many
Mm.
things, especially physical things, is important because a lot of people who struggle, even with solo travel, tend to be people who really care about having a space that's their own or having, connections to certain things, belongings, places, and or even people. It's easier to adopt this kind of lifestyle if you are not as attached to those things, and I think that's an important attribute to have.
Super, super important. I think the beauty of that process is kind of like the art of letting go. And I mean, it's not just letting go of the material, but also letting go of the emotions that come with it, right? The emotions that come with the material to some extent. I think I've been lucky enough that I've never been super attached to material stuff in general, right? Like, just from my upbringing, to be honest with you, it's never been my style. But there is a beauty in that process of letting go that I think is super liberating. And ultimately, people, let's say, I mean, I still have like a small little box, like an Amazon size box or something like that I kept of just like letters from when I was younger, like high school letters or Christmas letters and stuff that I've been saving. I mean, definitely those are the things that for me are irreplaceable ultimately, right? Like you cannot replace those things. So those I kept in a box. I keep it at my sister's. I may have a small little bag here at my mom's or something like that. Like it's not to go all out and just throw away all your super super sentimental valuables, right? But ultimately things that are replaceable that could potentially be replaced later on if you decide to, right? I think there's a powerful side to letting go of that, and once you do that at home or when you're trying to get rid of your things to some extent, you're also gonna take that on the road, right? And that's really important as well. It's also making sure that you don't get attached to the things, material things, especially that happen or you buy on the road, for example. I think it's a really powerful process. It's one of my probably my favorite memory of starting this crazy journey for sure.
Amazing. So you're about to embark in this journey to go travel. How do you decide where to go?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think for me, it's a little bit okay. So there's two sides of this, right? So I think about the first thing is to figure out more or less a region, right? So let's say, for example, I also want to note that before I started traveling, I had I had only been to like 3 or 4 countries in my entire life, right? So it's not like that was like a seasoned traveler or like even knew how to travel even like for vacation, right? Like I didn't take vacations, none of this stuff. So, I think I basically when I first started, I kind of just picked a region. You know, I really look at my bucket list items, right? So, for example, right before I started traveling to Europe, I was like, hey man, I would love to see the Niagara Falls. I've never seen Niagara Falls in my entire life, right? So, I just kind of started looking at like Niagara Falls, then saw Toronto, um, then kind of looked at what else is around the area that would be cool to visit, right? So Montreal, I've heard Montreal many years. Great, maybe book something in Montreal. Let me see what I can find. Um, and I think the other side of this actually started super early for me was couch surfing, which you and I met indirectly through couch surfing, obviously. So I also find that either talking to people from couch surfing or looking for hosts kind of gives you an idea of like where you could go. Um, Canada was when I first started traveling. That was my only experience staying with a couch surfer actually in Quebec, in this little island off of Quebec, super isolated. It was a older gentleman, and um, you know, he just needed help with the plants around his house, because he's much older. So I was so happy to be there with him. But that experience really kind of helped me understand the power of couch surfing in that sense. That like you don't have to always stay with people. You can just use it to meet people, to know where to go, to look at events that are happening and stuff like that. So couch surfing definitely helps me kind of guide my travels a little bit there. Yeah, I picked Europe after Canada, and I told myself, well, what's what's the place that makes the most sense. So once I pick a region, I kind of figure out what makes sense from a linear perspective, right? Of like traveling in those areas, because I don't want to be jumping around, right? So, or I don't enjoy that per se, right? I wanted to do a proper Euro trip where I get to a place and then just kind of cruise on in a more or less normal pattern. So I saw, I guess the closest to New York or Canada, I remember, I think it was from Toronto, was Portugal, right? Because it's mainly on the western coast. So yeah, just kind of start from there. Like look at Lisbon, obviously look at Porto, then see what's around there, right? I look at there's a website that I was looking at that time called Nomad List, which also gives you like a list of like cities and puts you in group chat. No, sorry, not in group chats, but it has like channels that you can chat with people. Of like, if you want to go to Portugal, for example, you can say, "Hey, I'm interested in going to Portugal. Any recommendations of places to see, where to stay, and stuff like that?" So I did a little bit of that when I was first starting, and yeah, from Portugal, just kind of followed a normal path, through, Spain and France and Italy and all of these countries, and that was kind of how I started. And once you get to those places, you meet people from different places, and they tell you like, "Oh, you should check out this place, or you should check out my hometown," and stuff like that, and then you really start building up your list of places that you love to visit, right? So I go back, put those in a list, and then kind of figure out another normal pattern, right, that would take me through these new places. So that's kind of more or less my approach, I would say.
So let's say you decide to go to Lisbon or to Porto. How do you decide how long you're gonna stay there, and how do you decide where to stay?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, especially when you have a visa period, right, you have to be mindful of that. So obviously in Europe, it's 3 months for people that have American passports, and I know a lot of other countries also have the same benefit. Um, so I kind of put a list of places that I wanted to hit on my Europe list, and kind of just divided up the days, right? So yeah, it's a interesting process because I just kind of put it in a spreadsheet to some extent when I'm doing a large trip like this. I just kind of put the different places on a spreadsheet. In Europe, it's a little bit easier because you can use like Schengen calculators and stuff like that, right? For you to add a location, add multiple locations, and it could help you split up the days. Yeah, so I can see, okay, well, I want to visit these 3 cities in Portugal. I want to visit these 4 cities in Spain, these 5 cities in Italy. How much time do I have, really, right? That's kind of the questions, especially if I want to use the 3 months that I got for the visa. So, um, I just start breaking it up in the places that I feel like I would want to spend more time in, and the places that I don't, right? Sometimes you go to a more remote place. Like I started in Madeira, Portugal, which I'd never heard of that place before I even started traveling or even started booking stuff for Portugal. But it just had like really beautiful mountains, and I was gonna do my scuba diving there. That's when I started my scuba diving sort of journey, and I was like, oh, they got scuba diving. I think it was like $400. Let me just check it out. Let's see what's happening in Madeira. Um, so it's also depends if you're booking for something. Like for me, I book a lot of stuff based on my activities. So if I'm doing scuba diving, I'm probably gonna need at least a week, right? Or if I'm doing a course, at least a week, 5 to 7 days. Um, but ultimately, once I divided up the days, then I start looking for accommodation, obviously, and um, either Airbnb, hostels. I mean, there's a whole system for that as well, for sure.
So the interesting thing when you think about where to go is has to be influenced by the fact that you actually have a day job.
Yes,
And
for sure.
so, what is the typical day like for you when you go to a new location? Between wanting to explore, see the place, and visit all the places you want to visit, and on the other side, be able to manage your priorities and deadline and meetings for your work.
So I have to prefix this by starting with it's not easy, for sure, right? It's not an easy process. I think it also depends on what your job is. For me, there was an aspect of traveling, especially back then I was traveling on my own, that I was like, well, I don't want to miss out on stuff, right? This is the conundrum, right? When you get to a new place, you're you have a whole list of things that you want to see, but at the same time you also have to work. In my case, so I really struggled with that at the beginning. I couldn't figure out, how much time I should dedicate to sightseeing versus how much time I should dedicate to working. And yeah, so at the beginning it was a little bit chaotic, as expected, right? Until you find your footing. Um, so basically, I think this also depends heavily on what job people may have. For me, I'm a software engineer. Software engineers, we have it's like the pros and cons, right? Like we have the benefit that we just kind of get thrown in the back room, right? In the dark little room, we're just writing code. We don't have a lot of people kind of, scheduling meetings with us, right? Like, so I think this is one of the benefits of being a software engineer, that I don't have a ton of meetings throughout the day, really, which is great because it gives me a lot more flexibility to just get my work done whenever I have a chance to get it done. Um, so I think that would be the first thing. It really depends on the job that someone may have, as how easy or hard this may be. The other aspect, which again could be a con or a pro, is the time difference, right? So when you're in Europe, I work California time, right? So I believe Europe is 7 hours, 8 hours, if I'm not wrong. So in that case, I could potentially, have the whole day to explore, right? So let's say 10 in the morning to 4 or 5 p.m. potentially. And from there, I come home, I guess I have some meetings and I get some work done. And even throughout the day, as I'm exploring, sometimes I bring my laptop and just kind of go to a cafe, get some work done, right? So I'm ahead of the day by the time that they start working in the West Coast, right? So I think that's a huge benefit to that as well. Obviously, when you get to places like Asia or India, for example, right, where you have really strange time difference, right, where you have a kind of 14 and a half hours or something like that, it gets a lot more difficult. So I think recently I've been limiting more or less my travel in these areas, just because 1 week is probably fine, 1 to 2 weeks, but after that, it's exhausting, right? You have meetings at 2, 3 in the morning, you're staying up all night. As much as you want to sleep throughout the day, the city is going on all around you throughout the day, right? So it's really difficult to kind of adjust to a completely like night shift, you know? So yeah, I think, if you're sensible around timing and sleep and stuff like that, you can probably do it, but it is not easy for sure. It's not the norm for your system to just completely switch from everyone else's schedule, I would say, around you. So
Yeah, I can relate to some aspects of that. Having
yeah.
just spent some time in India and trying to find time to meet with people when, yeah, your morning is their evening is your morning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let me shift gears a little bit towards another key question that I often get from people, which is the budget side. So you mentioned that you are a software engineer, so assuming you earn a good living to be able to afford it. And so when you
Yes.
think about your expenses, how much does it cost you typically when you're traveling around the world? And how does it vary from one region to the other for you?
Well, I mean, I think once you start looking, even just a quick check on Airbnb will kind of give you a good understanding of cost of living in general, not just accommodation, right? But um, there's definitely parts of the world that are much more expensive than others. Obviously, Australia, Europe are kind of on the same level, more or less, as the U.S. Right? So these are things that if you don't know them by the time that you want to start traveling, you'll find out pretty quickly that that's the case, right? So, um, you know, I think budget wise, I would say obviously depends on what kind of lifestyle you live before you decide to travel, right? So I lived a semi kind of luxurious lifestyle potentially um, in Los Angeles because it's a very expensive city, right? So, um, but when I started traveling, I realized that even with the paying for accommodations or paying for food and stuff like that across the world, um, there's still a savings that I have from traveling versus me living at home. I guess I'm thinking about paying for car payments, insurance, all of these costs that you have just by being in one in one place that you don't have those expenses anymore. I again, obviously being mindful of if you book a luxury Airbnb everywhere you go, your finances are gonna be your budget is gonna deplete much quicker, right? Than if you're more on a normal regular level, whatever that means. I guess it's a subjective term, but I really try to make sure that my experiences abroad, sorry, were not you know uh, ridiculous, right? I think maybe one area that I may spend a little bit of money might be like on experiences, on certain tours, and things like that. Obviously, food you can always find like the falafel places right on the corners, which give you good value no matter where you are, really, um, and things like that. I'm a vegetarian. I've been vegetarian for I don't know. I think 9 years or something like that, right? So. Um, I think it also helps me that in most places around the world, vegetarian food is like at least like 2/3 of the price of regular food. Like in the US, they charge you the same no matter if there's meat on your plate or not. But across the world, they actually care that there's no meat on the plate. They just charge you a little bit less. So it's lovely. Highly recommend vegetarian. That's my plug for today. And so yeah, I think when you get to places like Asia, for example, now you're this is a completely different lifestyle, obviously, right? Like you can find really high quality places to stay for substantially cheaper than anywhere else in the world. When you get to parts of Latin America as well, right? South America is very similar in that extent. Um, and I guess the other side of this is the tax benefits that you get as a digital nomad, right? So um, the U.S. has this foreign earned income exclusion exemption, basically, that FEIE, just to kind of put it out there in case people want to find it, that allows you, based on how many days you travel outside of the U.S., it allows you to exempt part of your salary from paying federal taxes. So that's something that I found. I think after my first year of travel, I think, for example, if you they say if you stay 330 days of the year outside of the U.S., it you don't have to pay federal taxes up to 125 or 130,000 something like that dollars of your income, which is I mean that in its own justifies the travel, right? Because that's a huge amount, a huge chunk of money that you're saving by not paying federal taxes on that income. So with the exemption included, travel has definitely been cheaper than me living in a U.S. in a city like Los Angeles, for example. Definitely.
Mm. When you think about going traveling, there are a lot of things that are going through your mind. There is a lot of uncertainty. So if you were to go back and talk to Emiliano, who's about to take off on this travel, what advice would you whisper to yourself um, to maybe do things differently or avoid certain mistakes you may have done?
That's a good question. I have to say, I feel like I'm the kind that doesn't really dwell on regrets. Listen, let me tell you, I think I live my life in a sense that no matter what happens to me, I know that I need to learn something from that, right? So ultimately, you always have the little things of like, hey, don't travel too fast. You may get burnt out, which I did. right? I definitely got burnt out. But I guess I wouldn't have learned that lesson if it hadn't happened, right? I feel like one thing is to tell someone not to do something, and the other thing is for them to do it and realize that they shouldn't have done it, right? So I think this is something that has always been important. Is I I mean, I'm mindful and careful. It's not like I'm doing all kinds of crazy stuff, but when I make a decision, I tell myself I have no other choice. Right? This is my only choice. Nothing else matters. So I did that when I started traveling. I was like, I have no other choice. I need to leave, and that's it. Right? And I think that's a beautiful mentality because it really allows you to be unapologetic or be unfazed to some extent about what happens. Right? You know that it's part of the experience. You know that you're gonna go to a place and be like, oh, I shouldn't have stayed out that late, or I should have, picked a different place or whatever the case. But that's part of travel. I think that's the beauty of it as well. The beauty of it as well, that you get to live these amazing experiences, and then you also get the experiences that humble you, right? So, yeah, to some extent, I will tell myself to do it exactly the same. As crazy as it sounds, everything that I have done, everything that has happened to me to travels, which mostly has been great, has taught me and really showed me a completely different life in some ways that I'm really grateful for. Yeah.
What have been some of the hardest moments for you?
I think dealing with, okay, well, I would say maybe dealing with the social pressure. So I'm a bit of an introvert ish. I'm an extrovert when I already break that barrier, right? Um, but it's hard for me to approach people in general. It's hard for me to go up to people like, hey, can I play volleyball with you guys? Or can I, just see a group at a bar and be like, hey, can I just join this conversation, right? That is terrifying for me. So when I first started, especially traveling solo, it's very difficult to have those moments where I'm like, oh, okay, I see people, they're at the hostel, they're like hanging out by the, I don't know, by the couches or whatever. Like, should I go up to them? Should I not? And to me, that was really difficult because I the times that I wouldn't do it, I kind of would feel ashamed. I would like shame myself for not doing it, which obviously just makes things worse. That's not the right, obviously not the right reaction to that. But ultimately, that's how you feel. That's how I felt. So, um, yeah, I think there's a part of traveling by yourself and traveling with someone, which I've been traveling with my partner for a couple of years now, which is great. But traveling with someone kind of removes those social pressures, especially if they're more social than you are, which is great, right? So it kind of complements, we kind of complement each other really well in that regard. Um, yeah, so I would say that is probably my most difficult aspect. After I decide not to talk to the group and just keep walking, I felt even lonelier, right? Just because that happened, just because I wouldn't approach them, the loneliness would start kind of kicking in a little bit heavier. And yeah, that sometimes it became a little bit difficult to handle. But as time went on, I just became a little bit more social and just kind of like slowly breaking down those barriers. And I think that's the beauty of travel as well. It really helps you with that.
Overcoming loneliness. It's not a common theme that you hear from people. It's um, people wanting to travel and not being able to connect with people, especially when people go above that typical audience for a hostel. So maybe they do want to get an Airbnb maybe because they have meetings and they need to work remote.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they may feel a little isolated.
Yeah.
And so being able to find your community is definitely a theme that I've heard a lot about over the last few years.
Yeah, it is definitely especially when you're working online. I think that's a really good point that you bring because you cannot just stay in. I mean, if you have meetings and you have to be in a professional setting, right? At least some part of your day, it is really difficult to share a hostel, or even sometimes when you get a private room in a hostel, it's still very loud and there's a lot of things happening around you, right? So that kind of makes it difficult. But at the same time, you want the social aspect, right? You don't want to be kind of put on the to the side in an Airbnb where you might not get to meet anyone in that country. And I think for me that was a difficult balance to find working remotely, right? I barely stayed in dorms. Maybe here and there, if on a weekend or something like that. If I'm doing a weekend trip or like a hiking trip or something like that, sure, right? If I'm not working, if I don't have anything important work-wise to do, but most of the time I had to stay in private dorms and then take my meetings from there, Airbnb sometimes, and find little social events happening around town, right? So that I can still get a feel for the place that I'm at. So yeah, but that's part of the fun as well, right? Like figuring out that dynamic for sure.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the hard moments. How about some of your favorite moments? Looking back at the last few years of travel, what are some of the moments where you're like, oh yeah, that was quite the experience?
Oh, there's been many for sure. I think there was a realization when I first started traveling alone that this is like my life, right? To some extent, I think I would say probably will happen to most people, right? Where it's you still can't believe it, right? Like those first few months, I didn't really get homesick as most people get homesick and stuff like that. Perhaps I didn't go through that phase. I guess kind of just like slowly miss home here and there, obviously. Um, but there was an aspect of kind of like walking around. I don't know. Let's say like when I went to the Eiffel Tower, dude, that was the most mind blowing experience for me, right? I, I went. I've always obviously seen the Eiffel Tower and in movies and stuff, but I've never seen it in person. So I get to Paris, and I'm walking. It's almost at midnight because I got there late. I'm walking towards the Eiffel Tower, and right as I cut the corner to see it, it lights up, right, like almost like a movie. It was incredible, right? And I was like mind blown. And I think that moment's when it kind of settled for me. I was like, wow, this is my life. This is insane, right? Um, I guess the second one that definitely comes to mind is during our motorcycle trip in India, for obvious reasons. But yeah, I had never ridden a motorcycle before, and you give me this crazy idea of like let's ride motorcycles in India. And I'm a kind of guy that I'm like, you know, I'm just gonna trust the system, right? Whatever happens, happens. I'm gonna say yes to this. You know, I'm a yes kind of person. I like to say at least I'll say yes to whatever. So I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And you tell me, oh, at first I thought we were gonna do like electric, motorcycles where they go up to like 60 miles per hour or something like that. And then you're like, oh no, we have to get the strong ones, right? We have to get the big ones so that we can ride in the highways and stuff. And I'm like, oh man, like I have to change gears is what you're telling me. You're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So as you remember or recall, we did a little motorcycle class right after we rented the motorcycles outside of the rental place. You kind of showed me the gears, you showed me how to switch the gears and all that stuff. And we just got on the road and we just started riding. I forget how long it was that we were on the road. I think it was a few days, just kind of hopping between village to village, from from Chennai to Kerala, right? So from the east of India all the way to the west. I would say that trip changed my life in many ways, in many ways. But definitely, I mean, I met my partner there, obviously, which is one of the highlights of that trip. But also, just putting myself through that experience of especially driving in India, which is a very sporadic place in some parts of India. Obviously, there's cows, there's all sorts of animals on the road. You have to be careful. I think there was a moment where I almost got into an accident. um, I was trying to kind of overrun like a bus, right? Like beat the bus so I can make it, and I almost hit this old man that was walking on the sidewalk, and I had a realization of like, wow, like I need to value, life so much more after that. To be honest with you, um, and it was a really beautiful lesson, and it took a while for me to learn it, but yeah, I think that's been one of the highlights as far as just. And I kept losing everything. I lost my phone. I lost my AirPods. My sandals broke. Everything was just going wrong, and everything was just going right at the same time. It was a magical experience, I would say, for sure. So yeah, I think it'll be difficult for something to beat that kind of learning, in such a short time. I guess I would say.
Emiliano, that is one of my favorite memories with you. Um, I mean, especially as you said, I mean, number one, you had never ridden a motorcycle before. I remember like teaching you how to change the gears, like literally like in 10, 15 minutes. And we were on the highway
Yeah.
in India. So it wasn't like, you get a lot of time to practice on your own in an empty street. Like we went from, okay, you can do it now to, great, we're on the highway going, 70, 80 kilometers per hour. And I think the first day we rode for 2 hours. And then for the following week, we were riding 3, 4, 5, 6 hours at a time.
Exactly.
Across villages in the mountains. And you did great.
Thank you, bro. Yeah.
So proud of you. And because you like a challenge, you hadn't strapped your bag to the back. So you were actually riding the motorcycle while having your backpack on your back.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, you lost your iPhone when we were there.
Yeah.
And then you lost your AirPods. So you basically didn't have direction. So not only did you have to be riding this motorcycle in a place where it's a bit chaotic, it's comfortable to ride the motorcycle, you have this bag on your back. I remember at a certain point it started raining and it started pouring.
Right.
And you don't know where you're going, you don't even have direction. So if you lose the person you're following, then you're like,
that's it.
Okay, where am I going?
Yeah. I forgot. Thank you for reminding me. There was a monsoon coming. If you recall, we were a monsoon was coming, and we had to make a choice. Either we kind of stay put, right, for the duration of the monsoon, or we get on the road and try to beat it. And we got on the road and tried to beat it. And Pablito and I I remember there was one moment when we stopped and we were just drenched, and I mean we couldn't see anymore. It was raining so hard, and we just found a cafe somewhere, I don't even know where, in the middle of nowhere, and we were talking and we were like, Pablito, I think I asked him or he asked me, I forget. I was like, what are the chances you think that one of us is gonna, just have a beautiful accident on this trip, where we, kind of fall or something happens? And he was like, maybe like 30%. And I'm like, don't you think that's a lot? Like, isn't that kind of crazy? And he was like, yeah, man. So Pablito and I just had this connecting, because Pablito also was fairly new at this, right? It was kind of like her first or second time riding or something like that. So I think the lessons that you learn from those kind of experiences of like valuing life and obviously meeting people along the way, all these villages, we were just kind of talk to people and just having like a beautiful experience. This is what travel is about ultimately, right? So I would do it again the exact same way, right? To that point, there's that beauty to that.
Memories of a lifetime.
Indeed, unforgettable for sure.
And one thing that you had mentioned is when you start traveling, you were traveling solo. During this India trip, you met your partner.
Yes.
And so you start traveling as a couple.
Mm-hmm.
And so what has it been like in terms of way to travel, the differences, things you like more versus things you like less?
So, I mean, there's a beauty to both. Obviously, there's a beauty to traveling solo. There's a beauty to making your own decisions without having to consult someone about them and stuff like that, right? I guess for me, there's two sides potentially. There's the kind of the budget side, which I would say is one of the biggest. Like when you travel with someone, you share a lot of the cost, right? So it saves a lot of money for sure to kind of split an Airbnb or split certain experiences and all that stuff, right? So when you're traveling in general, accommodation is usually your largest expense. So splitting those is really helpful for sure. But then there's also the social side, and I think the social side takes a hit, and I think almost expectedly, because you have someone to spend most of your time with, right? Even if you choose to go and do something else and go be social, or even if you guys choose to be social together, you still sometimes might just stay home long, like, hey, let's just chill, cuddle, and watch a movie, right? Instead of being like, oh, I should probably find some activity happening tonight, right? So I think the traveling solo has moments of a lot of social moments and meeting people and doing all sorts of activities, and the freedom to kind of pick wherever you want to go without having to consult or without having to run it by anyone else. but traveling with someone, I, it's definitely a magical experience on its own, in the sense that you share a lot of experiences, right? When you're, when you're doing all of these beautiful things around the world, it's also nice to look to your side and have someone to share it with, right? Like if you're there by yourself, sure, it's still special, right? But when you connect with someone over seeing the same thing, I think it's also really beautiful. And then there's also, yeah, like sharing accommodations and the cost that makes sense. I think finally the decision to travel, where to travel to, it's something that one of you kind of has to, take the charge. I guess I would say, right? So either I suggest, hey, I really want to go to this place, or she will suggest the same, and we'll see where to fit it in our itinerary, right? So I think if finding someone that first of all shares the same lifestyle, which is super important in my opinion, someone who also travels remote, who's kind of actively traveling often, is super important, and then someone who is open to going to places that you like, and vice versa, is probably the most important thing if to travel in with a partner for sure.
What would you tell a couple who's wanting to travel together? What are some of the advice you will give them to make sure that their relationship gets stronger with the travel? And what are some of the best practices or tips you would give couples who are wanting to travel full time, like the two of you do?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like be open minded to each other's suggestion, right? um, there's a there's a beauty to just sitting with the so let's say if one person wants to go to Africa and the other one wants to go to Europe, right? Ultimately, if you can't fit both, you may as well do it, right? But ultimately, don't say no immediately, right? Don't be like, oh no, I don't want to go there. Like, allow yourself to sit with that suggestion, do a little bit of research yourself, right? Figure out why is it that you don't want to go, if you don't want to go to that place for a specific reason, um, and try to try to hit both of your goals when it comes to travel. Even if you're traveling together, you may still have goals as if you were traveling apart, right? It doesn't really change, right? So understand that they may have goals to see certain things across the world or have certain experiences, and you have the same, right? So find a way to accommodate each other's goals and plan out. I think one of the things that we do that I think is really helpful is planning out way in advance. So I think last year, 2024, we basically planned out the entire year, like at the beginning of the year, basically. And it's a really fun process. Take maybe a couple of weeks, just looking up places, trying to see where we want to go, putting all of those ideas together, right? Which is a beautiful process in itself. And then you start finding, okay, which flight makes sense from which city, right? Like, how do we go from here to here? And then start building out your path. And by the end of that, you're gonna have a trip that you're both gonna be happy with, for sure. I think another advice is probably, just continue to be social. Don't let the relationship keep you too in your bubble, right? Because the beauty of travel is interacting with other people, whether it be local people or other travelers, right? So make sure you always try to do activities outside together, try to meet new people. I think it's one of the key things that could help your relationship, stay interesting and engaging, right? Ultimately, and then lastly, have some downtime as well, right? Which it may not be as difficult to do if you're traveling as a couple, but make sure that you don't get FOMO, right? Like you're not just forcing yourself to do everything. When we first met, my partner and I, we were traveling a little bit faster, right? We were like moving around like every 4 or 5 days, and that was difficult for her. And I think I had to understand that myself of like, hey, like this is not helping her or me, right? Because if she's not happy traveling, that doesn't serve me either, right? Because my goal is to continue traveling. So we kind of slowed it down and things like that. We stopped getting like having this fear of missing out on activities and stuff. It's like, no, one day you can just stay in. It's not a problem, right? Like 1 or 2 days during your trip, just stay in, relax, do something relaxing. And yeah, I think with those tips, I think it'll be it takes time to build up to that, but ultimately will help someone travel healthy and safe together for sure.
No, those are great tips. It's definitely a different experience when you're traveling solo versus traveling with somebody else
Yeah.
in a relationship. Another big one that I hear about a lot is just having somebody to rely on when you're going through a hard time, especially if you're sick. That's like one of the main challenges that many people struggle with solo traveling. So they may get somewhere, they may be feeling um, sick, they may need to go to a hospital, and that's one of the most isolating experiences
Wow.
you may have, especially if you don't speak the local language.
Yes.
And so whenever you have somebody traveling with you, that definitely makes a huge difference. And sometimes it's just having moral support when you have a tough day, or you've had meeting till 3 in the morning because of time zone and you haven't gotten any sleep,
Yeah.
and you're feeling grumpy the following morning.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can attest to this because like even when you speak multiple languages, right? Or like let's say you're traveling with someone who also speaks multiple languages, it's also beneficial, right? Because the language barrier is decreased in a lot of ways, right? So um, yeah, I think going through those challenges together, if you miss a flight or if you need to figure out where to go at the airport, having two sets of eyes, it makes a huge
Yeah.
difference.
Or another interesting one about the airport is just maybe you just want to go to the bathroom to be able to give your bag to somebody else
So
so you can actually go to the bathroom
So
and come
important.
back.
So important. That's such a good one. Like leaving your stuff with one person and just going, it's key. It's many times that I've been like, wow, if I get out of line, I have to wait another 2 hours. Imagine like having someone there to kind of help you out. Super, super valuable for sure.
So you talked a lot about your experiences over the last few years traveling. If we had to project in the future, what's your prediction? How much longer do you think you're going to be living like this? Do you expect this to last many more years? Um, I'd love to hear your perspective and maybe for us to revisit it years from now to see how
How
accurate
we're
we were.
doing. Yeah, for sure. I think I'm definitely open to continuing this lifestyle for the foreseeable future. I enjoy it, like thoroughly enjoy living like this. I think another aspect of having partnership is also you have to be mindful of what their desires are around this. My partner's definitely in a moment where she would like to kind of find a home base, right? Slow down. I think travel is always going to be part of our life, right? But what does it look like when someone wants to slow down, find like kind of have some sort of a home setting where we can put up stuff and paintings and decoration and all that stuff, right? So um, I guess my answer is twofold. If for me personally, uh, I think I would do this easily for a couple more years. um, Maybe a little bit slower, obviously not like jumping around every 5 days, but yeah, like 3 to 4 weeks at a place, you know like say like 12 places in 12 months, right? I think for me that's might be a good balance. um, and obviously having a partner that desires something else, I had to take that into consideration. So I think for people that may kind of go through something like that, I think having we're trying to figure that out now, what it looks like to have a home base and still have a travel be part of our life. But I think ultimately it's also cool to sometimes, like, she'll go home to her family more often and I'll stay out or go to another country, right, if I want to visit something. Like, I think there's a beauty also to having those moments of traveling alone for both of us that I think really kind of recharges your travel battery to some extent. So yeah, I guess we'll see where we are in a couple of years. I'm excited to follow up on that too, to see how you and I are are gonna be grounded in there.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought process. It's like it's hard to jump into this kind of lifestyle and to travel full time. I think it's also hard to jump out of it,
Yeah.
um, and being able to think about what your life would be like if you were settled somewhere. Um, One of the things that I like to describe is it's been so long that I've experienced a weekday versus a weekend.
Right.
Because for me, every day is the same. I might decide to open my laptop and do some work, whether it's Wednesday or Sunday, if they're just another day. Or a lot of times I actually prefer to do things on weekdays because chances are it will be less busy. As an example, if I want to go sightsee or I want to go on a hike,
Yeah.
I'm more likely to go on a weekday than on a weekend because people are working during the week, and so I can have the place to myself in many times. Yeah, definitely thinking about the transition out of this lifestyle is an interesting thing. I find that most people go from traveling really fast to slowing down.
Yeah.
When I've considered what that might be, I kind of like you, I see travel to always be part of my life, but it may evolve towards maybe having a couple, maybe a few places that are home bases,
Yeah.
and potentially thinking about the year in terms of seasons, and potentially living across multiple geographies on any given year. So rather than be traveling to new places every year throughout the year, which has been the typical schedule, being able to think about, well, again, depending on the northern or southern hemisphere, like there would be like, okay, a certain time of the year where you spend a few months in a certain place,
Yes.
and a few other months of the year that are spent in other places, optimized for the weather, and those are maybe the two home places. And then there is some traveling that happens between seasons,
Mhm.
meaning like, oh, maybe you spend 4 or 5 months on one side, you spend 4 or 5 months on the other side, then you've got these few months in between twice a year when you go explore new places or you go visit friends or you go do other travel. And then, while you're in those bases, you can always do weekend getaways within the region. So my guess will be that's probably the next evolution of my travel lifestyle, but who knows? Maybe we'll look back a year from now and we're both in LA and sitting in traffic and thinking back about all the magical moments we had while traveling.
I think it's a good point as well, because I think it also depends on like family, for example, right? Like, where is the family located? Like my family, her family, your family, right? So ultimately, if that has to be part of your home base, right? Like where your family is has to be part of your home base. I think it also makes a difference being in a place like the U.S. where it's much more expensive to have a temporary home or a home that you can just rent out for the year and live in it, part of the year, right? That might not make sense, but when you go to, if you find a home base in South America, for example, Colombia or something like that, where you can easily rent a place and it's more justifiable, right? Because it's that much cheaper than doing something in the U.S. I think those are kind of some of the questions. Like, oh, do we find a home base that's like a direct flight to where our families are, right? That may be the kind of the balance here. It's like just finding a place where it's still very cheap and nice, beautiful beaches, but it's a quick and easy flight to see family when needed, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of dynamics that go into kind of figuring this out. But I think I'm with you as well, man. I'm already kind of just like, it would be cool to have a few home bases for sure. I definitely have a few ideas of where those may be, but ultimately, I think coming back to see family is always gonna be a priority for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's one thing that I think about a lot is, as parents, as people get older, we don't know how long we have with them. And one of the most magical things about the last years is having that flexibility to go fly and spend time with family without being restricted with vacation days.
Right.
If you have a corporate job and let's say you're based in the US, maybe you have family overseas. And so maybe you get 3, 4, 5 weeks of vacation per year. And maybe there are some days you take off to do things locally, maybe you take a trip here and there. And whenever you're going to travel overseas to go visit family, maybe you only have a week, maybe you have 2 weeks to spend time with your parents.
Yeah.
And then if you zoom out and you start, well, how many more years do I get to spend with my parents? Depending on how old they are, you may have 10 years, 20 years, just averaging life expectancy numbers together. And you realize that maybe you have a total of 3 months together, 4 months together,
Exactly.
split out across many years where you're only spending a few days here and a few days there, or maybe a week here, a week there. And so being able to visit them whenever you want, one of the things that I've set as part of my schedule is I make an effort every year to go spend at least a month with them, and it's been a true blessing. And having that kind of freedom has been one of the highlights of having this kind of travel lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, it's been a beautiful to also get my family to travel places, right? Like we all met up in Japan. Obviously, we were there together, you and I, and obviously my family came to visit, which for them has been a dream, to go to Japan um, and experience that. So I think I'm like finding a balance. And even then, when I come to visit my mom and my family, half of the time we're out exploring something new, right? Like even at home. And I think there's like the travel spirit that you can't get rid of no matter where you are. Either if you're not traveling in Asia, you still have plenty to travel within where you used to live or where you're from or where your family lives, right? There's always stuff to see. So I think I'm realizing that quite a lot of like coming back home to see my parents, and taking them out. Like let's go to this place. I've heard of it. I heard it's cool, right? Like let's check out this place.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm traveling somewhere, like my family and I are now going to Dominican Republic, which is where I'm from originally. And I'm just kind of getting the travel spirit into the family. I think it's it's really beneficial also for them because they work all their lives and they also need to see the world. Like we already understand the benefits and the the beauty of it, and it's so beautiful to pass it down or pass it up, I guess you could say, right, to your parents, to some extent. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think travel has shifted my relationship with my family for that reason. I just get to show them more of the world, and it's the best. It's like a dream for me to some extent.
Another thing that you mentioned is spending more time in a certain place. And I know that over the last year, one experience you've been having is house sitting.
Yeah,
Do you mind sharing your experience with that and what it's been like, and any advice you'll give others who may be interested in doing the same thing?
definitely. So I shout out to you obviously for introducing that to me. I think house sitting has been a great tool for us to save money, especially in the U.S. or places that are more expensive, right? So um, we signed up for house sitting a couple of months ago, um, and it it basically kind of started filling out our profile, putting up pictures with pets and animals and stuff like that we've taken over the years, and slowly figuring out where we want to spend some time in, right, when it comes to house sitting. So our first house sit was in Brooklyn, New York. um, it was just with this couple that had a cat, and super easy house sit. The cat was super chill, and it was a really nice neighborhood. And for us to book an Airbnb in a place like that would have been thousands of dollars most likely, right, for that duration of time. So um, house sitting has unlocked an entire new, I would say, ability for us to stay long term in places that are very expensive, right? Um, and allow us to also kind of put those finances to something else, right? We can do an experience, or we can get like a really nice gym, right, in places without having to think of a budget or anything like that. For those who don't know what house sitting is, obviously you get to stay in a place for you pay a yearly membership to this platform that matches you with people that want to go on vacation or need to travel somewhere, and they need someone to take care of their pets in their home, or plants, or both, most likely both. And you you basically stay there for free as an exchange, right? So um, doing those sort of things in the US, Europe, I know has a lot of, in Australia, for example, where the prices are much higher, could substantially extend your budget, extend your ability to travel comfortably in these kind of places. I think you and I have talked about the fact that being a couple helps a lot. So when you have a profile with two people in it as a couple, I think people just kind of trust you more, right? Knowing that, first of all, you kind of have someone that vouches for you and back, right? Like you're kind of vouching for each other to some extent. It's not like a weird kind of person that may seem shady or something. It's like, you know, you come together as a couple, as a union to some extent. And second, just having more hands on deck. It's always going to be a pro, right, to people as they have cats or dogs or sometimes multiple at the same time. They will probably want to have someone or two people taking care, giving love to the pets at the same time, taking them on walks. So yes, traveling solo is definitely possible. It takes a little bit more time probably to build up your profile. Whereas traveling as a couple, for sure has been much easier for us. So I think we're going on our fifth house sit right now in San Francisco, which is great. It really allows us to spend 5 days. I think we're going to be in San Francisco, travel around, check out the area, explore, and then that's it. Come until the next one, obviously, right? So it's a beautiful tool.
Yeah, I concur. I think that one of the challenges of having this kind of lifestyle is we don't have the ability to have pets.
Yeah,
And so being able to spend some time with cats and dogs and being able to stay in some really nice places and visit um, destinations you may not otherwise get a chance to go to has been really cool. Yeah, just like you, we've been doing it over the last year and we had the chance to go to some really cool places. As an example, during the holidays, as you know, we were in the Cayman Islands for 3 weeks,
I'm jealous.
and it was a very it was a very enjoyable stay. And this summer, we'll get the chance to go spend a month in Alaska in a small little town, and experience what it's like to live in Alaska for a month, which I don't think we would have opted in as an experience without this kind of tool. So definitely, it's not for everybody, but if you do care about animals and you're looking for opportunities to stay in some places, it's like anything. It's like a job market where there are some great opportunities, there are others that are not as good,
Right.
and it's a competitive space where you have to sell yourself to the homeowners the same way they're trying to sell their house, and the house sit as an opportunity for house sitters that are highly reviewed. So if that's something that's of interest to you, go check it out. The website is called trustedhousesitters.com.
Yep.
And yeah, who knows? You may get a chance to go on some adventures around the world, spend some time with some pets without having to break the bank.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a great tool. Sometimes they also include a car, as obviously I think in the Cayman Islands you had a car or somewhere, right?
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've been very lucky. We've also been very intentional about choosing some house sits where we like the setup, we like the animals, and we like the hosts, and being able to build that trust with them. We feel very lucky because many times not only do we get a nice place to stay in, but they also provide us with their own car to drive
Yeah.
while we're there. And so even though we may be in some places that are very expensive, like the Cayman Islands, really we only had to spend money on activities and food. And so ultimately, after over 3 weeks we spent there, we didn't really have to spend a lot of money per se, even though it was a very expensive place if you try and go there as a tourist.
And I think even more so, one of the beauties of trusted house sitters is that you have a kind of like a reference if you ever go back to that place, or if you want to go back to that same place, right? So for example, here in Los Angeles, we did a couple of house sits, and now they say, hey, whenever you're back in, or whenever you're thinking of traveling back to Los Angeles, just hit us up, right? Like you have a direct connection to these people that you're house sitting for, and you're able, they basically just plan their trips. They plan their trips around whenever you're gonna be back home, right? So you always kind of have a place, more or less, to stay when you go back to that same place, and I think that's one of the biggest benefits of it for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I've been thinking about whenever we decide to choose a house sit is, do I see myself as being friend with those people?
Yeah,
And so if the answer is no, then we likely wouldn't pursue that opportunity. But we feel like between that and the ability to build a relationship and get to know these people, I feel like we have some good friends in many places that we have met through that platform. There was one couple we got to know and spent time with in London, who offered us to stay over at their the guest room whenever we pass into London. And so yeah, some really nice people. And I think that going through that, like asking yourself, I think for other people who are thinking about doing this, is asking yourself, are these people who I'll otherwise be friends with? It just makes the whole thing so much
So
easier.
much.
And then number two is, will I still opt for this versus be somewhere else? Was an important other criteria I like to ask myself, which is, if I would rather get my own Airbnb and be hiking the mountains in that country, or if I'd rather be somewhere else, like I don't want it to feel like work.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of an exchange where it's a place where I want to be at that time, because we have the freedom to be wherever we want to be. And so if I would rather book my own Airbnb and have more freedom, then I will do that. But if I'm very excited about the opportunity of being in that place, in that house, with those pets, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the right fit. So I think that makes the whole experience more enjoyable versus being spending a lot of time in places doing things that you don't love. And I guess life is too short not to do that.
Absolutely. Traveling as a couple, also being doing house sitting allows you to, hey, one person takes care of the pet while the other one maybe does that hike, right? Or goes to that event or whatever the case. If you have a little bit of time on your own, super valuable as well. So it's a really great tool. I we definitely will be using it for the foreseeable future for sure. It's part of our if it's part of our travel tool set now.
Yeah, that's great. Um, is there any other topic or any other subject we haven't covered relative to travel that you'd want to share some thoughts or ideas about?
Well, I guess maybe the one that comes to mind is like, how do you get either a remote job or your company to agree to this, right? To some extent, there are some people obviously that are working for a company already that may or may not be remote. Um, you know, I think that's one of the things that if you don't have a remote job, if you're trying to get out of a current office situation to turn remote, I think that's one of the hardest conversations to have. Um, there is a I remember there's a like a checklist online or something like that, or like a PDF that you can download. I remember at the beginning of my travels, I saw like a PDF where it tells you like the benefits, like, oh, send this to your boss, right? The benefits of living a digital nomad lifestyle. Um, so I thought that was a good kind of catch, um, kind of like catchy, way of opening up that conversation with your boss, right? I think right now, especially in the United States, I think people are shifting more towards going back to the office. It seems like it's increasingly harder to find a remote job. Even if you have a remote job already, they're starting to kind of shift gears. For me, it's kind of slowly turning in that way. So I'm trying to write it out, obviously, as much as I can. Um, but I think having an open conversation with, just being upfront about it, it's going to be hard to hide. In general, some people may try to hide the fact that they're traveling, using VPNs, or I don't know, if you have to like turn on your camera at any point, they're gonna know most likely that you're in a different place. Um, so I think that's one of the things that I always say. Like all of my kind of team, my supervisors, managers, everyone knows that I'm doing this, and they, as much as they wish that I was at the office, they accept me, traveling. I think also just having that sort of, uh, kind of like work ethic and putting in the work and making sure that they, it's not that easy for them to just let you go if you decide to do this. Obviously, that's always going to be at your favor, right? Um, the second thing I wanted to mention as a digital nomad is internet, which I'm not sure if you've covered on your other episodes, right? But, uh, you know, talking about getting SIM cards, right, everywhere you go, and stuff like that. When you're traveling as a digital nomad, you may travel to places that don't have super, uh, you know, reliable internet, to say the least. And some of those things you could, filter out by, like, if you're renting an Airbnb, you ask them to send you a speed test. Same with a hotel, same with a hostel. But one of the most important things that I do is I get a SIM card almost everywhere that I travel to. Right. It's a little bit complicated for iPhone users right now because the new iPhones don't have a physical SIM card slot, which is very unfortunate. I'm deeply disappointed in Apple for that. So I had to buy my iPhone in Australia because in Australia and other territories they still have a physical SIM card. So it's only I believe in North America, maybe South America, I'm not sure. So, yeah, one of the things I would say that's really helpful if you do have a physical SIM card slot is to get a SIM card everywhere you travel to. In case the internet goes off for whatever reason, you still have a plan B. uh, Looking up the best SIM card, um, provider in that area. I think it's traveltomtom.com if I'm not wrong. Has an article about each place in the world. What are the best networks that you can get a SIM card for, and all that stuff. So that's one of my top tips when traveling and working online. Um, yeah, just making sure that you have a good space. Sometimes you may find co-working spaces where you travel. Sometimes you may not. You may have to take a meeting in your room or something like that, right? But ultimately, just making sure that you have a quiet, comfortable space in case you need to take any meetings or just in case that you need to focus. Um, yeah, it's super important as someone who travels and works full time.
Now you bring up some great points. I think the number one thing is the just delivering, getting your work done.
Yeah,
I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter if you're going in the office or you're working remotely from your home in the same location or you're around the world. If you get your work done and you are going above and beyond, and not just in terms of putting in the hours, in terms of delivering results,
yeah,
at that point it doesn't really matter. Like as a manager, like you're not gonna go to your employees and be like, no, you need to clock in at this time and clock out at that time. In a lot of company cultures today, it's all about getting your work done. Even though overall, even though like the tide as you mentioned is shifting in the other direction, and I think one of the reasons is because a lot of people looked at this opportunity to work remotely to just slack off, and so I
yeah.
think the general trend now is trying to cut the fat and be able to say, all right, well, let's be efficient as an organization and let's keep the people around and have people show up to get stuff done. With that being said, I do see a lot of value in being in the office around for certain type of work. But as you mentioned, for somebody like you who may be needing to spend a lot of time, writing code and building things with a lot of sort of time, it can be a good fit.
You know, I think you bring up a good point in that also there's a benefit to being at the office, and that's very true. I think, for example, I guess if you have a remote job, or let's say you have a job where they have a physical office, most of the time you can work remotely, but from time to time, I always go to the office whenever I'm back home, right? So from home for me is Los Angeles. So this time around, I was at the office 2 to 3 weeks, I think maybe 3 weeks, consistently going to the office almost every day, and that recharges my focus to some extent, because you're right. I mean, when you're traveling full time and so many things going on around you, so many fun things, exciting things, you can definitely get lost in the sauce. You can definitely start slacking off a little bit, right? And I think one of the things that I've done is at least once a year, whenever I travel home, I'm at the office. I'm doing my 9 to 5, right? I'm sitting on my desk. I'm not on my phone. I'm not preparing food while I'm working, right? I'm at the office. Maybe I'll get a cup of tea and get my work done. And this time around, I will say that was very reinvigorating, which is rare because I usually get anxiety when I'm in an office space. I'm like, I just want to be outside. But this time it really helped me to kind of focus and like, narrow down my mind and actually get work done. And that has last time I was at the office was a couple of weeks ago, and I've been consistent ever since. I've been like getting my work done. I've been doing my pomodoros and all my stuff that really helps me. So yeah, totally would recommend if you have a physical office space, go once, twice a year if you want to or can, for a couple of weeks to just kind of, first of all, help you reconnect with your coworkers, right? Because that's one thing that gets lost the most traveling, doing digital work. But secondly, just to find that focus again, right? To find that to remove all these distractions for a while, it really helps you keep that momentum up. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great point.
yeah, definitely important to build a relationship with the people that you work with, and having that in-person time is definitely important.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a different question, which is, if you had to give advice to somebody, let's say they just graduated from college, maybe they're working somewhere, they're in their 20s or 30s, they may be in a type of career that may not be um, easy for them to work remotely and do their work remotely. So but they really want to adopt this kind of lifestyle to travel full time. So it may involve gaining new skills. Like, what advice would you give to them? What would be let's say it's your little cousin or somebody in the family who comes to you and
Yeah.
says, Emiliano, I really need some advice. Like, I am a nurse right now. I am, doing X, Y, and Z, where I'm going to the office. I'm a manager at the local um, restaurant or whatever. Like, but I really want to have this kind of lifestyle. So, what's your prescription to them? What's the plan A, B, C, D to be able to get to this lifestyle?
So, yeah, that's a great question. I would say, let's say, starting with, do you have a job already? Obviously, it's a remote. In your case, it's not. Is it possible for you to still do it? Like, let's say you're like a tattoo artist or something like that, where you can sort of kind of bring it on the road, right? Or if you're like if you do jewelry or something, right? So I've met a lot of people traveling that maintain their lifestyle, or maybe even a photographer, right? So just kind of putting out those kind of jobs that are still flexible in that sense, right? You know, you can still find ways to potentially do it on the road. Um, I mean, second, I would say, if what is your fear? I would ask them, right? Like, is your fear not having enough money? Is your fear the dangers that you hear about other countries, right? Where do your fears lie? Because those are usually pretty easy to kind of dispel, right? When it comes to travel, if you have uh, if you have a like a kind of like a super, I don't know, let's say you work at Whole Foods or something like that, right? And you want to quit your job and go travel, right? You don't have a lot of savings. Obviously, one of the biggest thing that I've I've seen people and met people traveling that they do is workaways. So I'm sure you're aware of like workaways where you can actually volunteer your time in many places around the world, and you get to stay there for free. Most of the times, I believe that they give you food, accommodation, right? So the basic necessities are met. So I would always recommend people to check out workaways. I think I would be mindful of maybe if you're able to take some time off of work. Let's say you can take 2 months off of work, and just go and do that and see if it's something that you really want to pursue. Then that would be my recommendation. If you can still keep a job, just in case. Even though I'm always for the nuclear option, like just go, don't worry about it. Things will sort themselves out. If there is a fear of like losing a really good opportunity back home or something like that, I would say try to find some time off, as much as you can, and just do it and see how it feels, right? Like see how much value it brings to your life. Um, I would also tell them that when you're first starting, there's a lot of getting used to, right? Especially if you haven't traveled a lot before. In my case, for example, I had to get used to a lot of things when I first started traveling. I had to get used to um, booking flights and looking at flights notifications and understanding airports and understanding public transportation in different countries, right? Like there's a lot that you're learning to do at first. So, but if you stick with it, they get much easier as you go along. So don't give yourself like 2 weeks, I guess is what I'm saying. Like make sure that you give yourself at least a couple of months at the least for you to really try it out, really see if you like it. Um, maintain relationships back home. You can get on phone calls, video, FaceTime, and all that stuff. Obviously, now with the internet, it's so much easier. So make sure that you're still talking to your friends, family, right? Make sure that you still have that connection back home. I think it helps to kind of simmer down the loneliness or the homesickness um, at one time. And ultimately, most people that are younger, they usually travel in hostels, and obviously, hostels are still a great experience, right? As you travel, especially if you're on a budget, staying in shared dorms and dorms at hostels is probably the easiest way to meet people. Like, no doubt about it, right? So, go check out the hostels. Check out hostels that are really well, highly rated, really well reviewed. You don't want to be in a shifty, kind of place ultimately, but you know, find you'll find a lot of similar people going through the same journey more or less as you are, and to some extent that's going to continue to inspire you to to continue doing this. So yeah, I guess those would be my tips probably to someone in that scenario.
Yeah. Now you bring up some good points around. Not everybody has to do this full time. Also, like
Yeah.
you can just decide to do work away,
Yep.
and take some time off from work for a month or two. Maybe take a sabbatical if it's more of a corporate job. Take a leave of absence and go do something and come back.
Hmm.
Or there are people who look for seasonal jobs. And so, as an example, I've met people who may go to a ski resort and work as a ski instructor for 2 or 3 months. Or you mentioned that you have a passion around scuba diving, and so maybe you can go work somewhere for 3 months. Or many people in the workaway um, arrangement will go and work in a hostel, checking in people or hosting activities, etc. And so there is always uh, there are different options, or you can do some trusted house sitting,
Yeah.
uh, and then have this wonderful little cat
Oh my God.
to hang out with us in the podcast. Um, yeah, so there are many options. Depending on your, not everybody. I don't think it's the right formula for everybody to just quit their job
Yeah.
and go do it. You mentioned like depending on your risk tolerance, depending on your responsibilities. Maybe you cannot afford to do that. You have some financial responsibilities. Maybe you have some debt. Maybe you're taking care of family members. You need a certain budget to be able to do that. But my belief, similar to what you were saying earlier, it's like you can find opportunities to do it. Or even like in terms of jobs, maybe you are working at the local Whole Foods and it's you're able to pay your bills, etc. But maybe there is an alternative way. Like nowadays, there are so many opportunities out there, right? Like you can say, all right, well, maybe I'm gonna launch my own podcast. Maybe I'm gonna start creating content. It doesn't mean that you're gonna be successful, but these are things that you can do on the side while you have that day job to get something off the ground. And ultimately, whatever you pursue, it has to be something that you're excited and passionate about, and that you should do either way. And nothing comes overnight. It's kind of like what you're saying. You're not going to learn everything about travel in 2 weeks. Like
Right.
it takes months to get there. And so whatever you decide to pursue, you have to put in the hours. You have to stay dedicated. You have to keep improving on it to eventually get somewhere where you have something that's beneficial for others, that serve a certain value, to maybe create something that can generate revenue in the long term, to be able to provide you with enough money to travel and have this kind of lifestyle. The other thing that I was gonna say is, for some people, it just may mean, yeah, I'm gonna save a bunch of money. I'm just gonna go travel for a while and come back. Like there is no formula. And the other part of it is sometimes you have to just look back and say, all right, what skills do I have? What am I good at? And what are the problems that the world has? As an example, let's take the example of a podcast. Great. Are you good with software editing? If not, go learn it and reach out to people. Like create your own opportunities is one of the advice I often give people, which is like don't just go apply for jobs. Figure out what you're good at and go create your own opportunities out there. I find that goes a long way towards being able to create your own opportunities. And so like especially when it comes to working remotely, maybe this is your opportunity to be self-employed or to build your own business. And it doesn't have to be this big venture. It can literally be, yeah, you know how to code, great. Maybe you just work as a freelancer or take on project on a seasonal basis. Maybe like 3 months out of the year, you go be that ski instructor and you make some money that way. And then maybe half of the year, you are doing some freelance work. Maybe it's about video editing. Maybe it's about creating social media content for a company. Maybe it's about, like it's really about reassessing what skills you have and being able to understand what is the gap in the market. What are people looking for? Great. Maybe AI is taking over the world. Great. Understand it. Understand how people are using it. What are the problems people are facing when using it? What are the challenges that are out there? Like, oh, maybe people are trying to adopt it. They don't know how to do it. Oh, great. So maybe you can train them how to use it. Like really create your own opportunities and don't be just looking for a job. Offer to solve a problem for businesses or for individuals and create your own opportunity.
I think you hit it then right in the head when you talk about AI. I think that's one of the biggest advances that we've seen since we started traveling, for sure, where people can do all sorts of work online, right? Copywriting, they could do social media marketing. I mean, literally, they can, the options are almost limitless now of, kind of signing up, even like going on Fiverr and Fiverr.com, which is, kind of gives you like little quick online jobs that you can sell, your services. People buy them there and stuff like that, right? Just put something up there, like social media marketer or copywriter or something. If you feel passionate about those things, AI will really help you. It's really good at those things, right? So you kind of have to, even if you have limited understanding of those things, AI will fill a lot of those gaps for you. And then the second thing that I cannot forget to mention, because we've met a lot of people like that across the world, is having working visa programs, right? Which is a huge thing that most people, especially in college, do, right? Where you can go to Australia for a year, and they'll give you a visa, working visa for a year. You work. There's different kind of jobs that you can pick, I believe, as far as what you want to dedicate your time to. New Zealand is another one. For example, I just had a coworker go to New Zealand for an entire year, and kind of just volunteer there, here and there, right, in New Zealand. So having those kind of working visa experiences is also really helpful, and those are paid, right, for the most part. I know the one in
No,
Australia, for
they are.
example. Exactly, right. So those are paid. You get to live comfortably in a new place, meet a lot of new people, see how it feels to be away from home, but still get paid, right? And some of them get paid decent money, right? So, yeah, I think working visas are another great way of having a safety net. If your fear is like having low budget or anything like that, that's a great way. Just go and work in Australia for a year, and explore and travel, meet people, and still have, you don't have to cut into all of your savings, I guess.
Now, you mentioned the working holiday visas.
Yeah.
Just a few points on those. Most of those are only relevant for specific countries, mostly Western countries. So Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Canada, US, they all have this kind of. I don't know about the US specifically, but I know Americans can do the other ones. I don't know if others can come to the US one, but I know it exists in Canada, and it's basically a tourist visa that also comes along with a authorization to work, and so you can just apply for that. It typically costs a few $100s, and then you can just fly there, and as long as you have enough savings to sustain yourself in the beginning, you can just land any kind of job. You can work as a waiter at the local coffee shop. You can also work for a large corporation. It's basically you have a work permit for a certain amount of time. And in the example of the Australia one or the New Zealand one, they also have the ability to be extended for second year or third year if you take on certain type of jobs, such as farm jobs, because they have a shortage of people to work in the farms. And so if you spend at least, I think it's about 88 days, if my memory is right, your first year working in a farm, then you qualify for a second year. And so some people just take a break. I have a friend of mine who was a dentist. I had a friend of mine who was a lawyer. And so they can just take time off and go there. The only restriction as well is an age restriction by country. And so, as an example, some of them are restricted for people that are younger than 30, some are for people that are younger than 35, but there are possibilities out there. Or you may even look at it and say, maybe that's an opportunity for me to become an expat. So maybe look at opportunities within your company, or look up for jobs in Singapore or in Ireland, whatever, to be able to say, all right, well, maybe I want to go and see other parts of the world, and there are other ways of doing it, where maybe you want the stability of a job, you want to base yourself in another part of the world, and maybe you spend a year or 2 or 3 doing work in that location while traveling more in that part of the world. I don't think there is a right or wrong way to do it, but I think it's important to make sure that you really check in with yourself to understand what's important to you. And as an example, like if spending time with your family is the number one thing for you, if being in that small hometown that you really care about then do that. And if you also love traveling, go take on trips and come back, but don't do something that's not a good fit, because ultimately you'll burn out. You'll be unhappy with this kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think so you bring up a good point about the age restrictions as well, right? So outside of the working holiday visas, you also have the digital nomad visas, which are completely different. Obviously, these are for people that have a job, mostly full-time job. That I think there's requirements as far as how much you earn or how much you have in the bank. I believe I've never applied for one of these, but Spain has really good digital nomad visas, parts of Europe. Um, so it's really important to also see that as an option. Check those out. There are some of them can be like a kind of like a long process. So it's really good to find either people that kind of work in this industry already, where they help others get digital nomad visas. I don't recall any names, but there's a multiple like influencers and stuff that just focus on that, right? Like that's their livelihood and helping people get digital nomad visas. So finding some good content online as to like how to get those digital nomad visas. Sometimes they ask you to be in the country when you request a digital nomad visa because you get more time, for example, versus requesting the digital nomad visa outside of the country. Things like that, those kind of tips, we wouldn't know off the top of our head, right? But someone who's expert in that will have all of that information. So yeah, that's another really great option. They give you a year or 2 years. I believe you can extend it as well after the first year, right? So you can get that and work freely there, live freely there without having the visa restrictions. So
Yeah.
that's another really great avenue.
Yeah, there is. I've looked into some of these programs. Like there is one in Brazil, for example. There are some in Indonesia to spend time in Bali, etc. And so yeah, you have two options. Like I find that in most cases, I personally just like to do a bunch of research and just do it myself. You can
Yeah.
also outsource it to a third party who can guide you through the process or even do the process for you. On a related note, there are also other types of visas you can apply to if you want to stay in certain places for longer periods of time. Some of them are investment visas, and so
Mm.
sometimes if you have a certain amount of savings, you can qualify for residency in that country if that's a destination that you enjoy, etc. Ultimately, in order to have this kind of lifestyle, it does help to have a passport that opens lots of doors for you, which is a topic we haven't touched on, but it's definitely much easier to have a passport from North America, from Europe, from certain parts of Asia such as Singapore or Japan, etc. Because you get access to many countries as a tourist for 30 days, for 90 days at a time, and you can easily travel from one place to the other. Versus if you are from countries where they're not as economically prosperous, well, the procedures tend to be much longer. You need to apply at a consulate, weeks or months in advance. You potentially need to have your itinerary already locked, and so that's one thing I often tell people. Having this lifestyle is a privilege,
Yeah.
and it is unfortunately not a possibility for everybody just because of the place where they happen to be born.
Yeah.
And so like I'm very grateful for that opportunity to be able to have a passport that allows me to travel the way I do, and it definitely makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it really does. I'm also obviously very grateful for that opportunity. I think Dominican Republic, in my case, we have certain abilities to travel to Europe here and there and stuff like that, but it's definitely not as much as I would be able to travel with my U.S. passport, right? So I think you make a really great point. I guess going back to ideas, if someone is in an area where they need a lot of visas, like visa requests and all that stuff, maybe that's a good opportunity, right, to be that person facilitating those for other people, and that's your business strategy, right? I've seen that quite a lot coming up, and I think it's really brilliant because you'll get people that really, let's say, people that work online don't want to spend 5 to 10 hours or whatever the case figuring out this whole process and maybe getting it wrong. I think it's a cool new industry that's coming up, like people that are experts in figuring out visa applications, and they really understand your situation and know what's the best course of action for you to get approved the quickest and all that stuff. So yeah, maybe that's a good little business venture to start there for someone in that position, right, where they can maybe apply for multiple visas at once, and stuff like that. But it is for sure a privilege. That's a really great point. I'm glad you brought it up because definitely not everyone can do this. Unfortunately, obviously, we all wish that was different, but that is the reality of the world today.
Yeah. The other thing that's talking about privilege is something that I've also realized over time is being a man is definitely much easier than being a woman when you're traveling the way we do.
Yeah.
And I've had many conversations with friends and other people who travel the way we do, and not every destination, not every country, not every culture treats men and women equally, and so being on your own and you can feel lots safer and than in other cultures. Being a man versus a woman, and so that's just something that's unfortunately a reality of the world we live in. It doesn't mean that it's impossible for women to go to certain destinations. It's just much easier. Like as an example, we were recently in the north of India, and I was talking with my partner about her experience versus mine, and she experiences a lot of people staring at her, versus I don't have to experience that. I just walk
Right.
around. Or there was another example of whenever I go to a certain destination, I might look at all the options for accommodations and opt in for an accommodation that might be a little bit out of town, that's maybe a little more isolated. Where in her case, when she was traveling solo, she would never choose a place like that because it may be unsafe. And so that's definitely another privilege we have as well.
No doubt. Another great point that you bring up. Obviously, I've met many women traveling, even traveling solo, that have explained to me the limitations. And honestly, I think, we sometimes think of it as like, oh, these specific countries here and there, but honestly, it's most of the world, right? Like, if you think of the man experience versus the woman experience when traveling in this case, um, is vastly different. The things that we have to worry about versus the things that they have to worry about, for sure. I think, um, one of the things I found a lot is kind of women traveling with other women, or congregating to some extent, right, to minimize their risks of traveling in a specific place. um, Makes a huge difference, for sure. One thing that my partner always brings up that we've talked about is, if as a woman traveling solo, she traveled solo for years before she met me. She would make sure not to drink, not to drink too much, right? Which sometimes we get comfortable with a group of people and forget that we just met them that day, right? Like they're not our lifelong friends that are going to be responsible for bringing us back, right? Like they may all also be drinking, and something happens and you're potentially in a place in a very scary situation. I mean, it happens often, unfortunately. And obviously we wish the world wasn't that way, but it is today, and we have to be mindful of that. And I think obviously for you and I, our responsibility as men is ensuring that obviously whoever we meet, any women that we meet, or doesn't matter who, feels comfortable, right? Like that is our responsibility, making sure that they feel comfortable, making sure that they know that we have their backs no matter what happens. If you see someone in a stressful situation or something like that, right? Like it's just being there for them. And I think, yeah, I mean, I've been with friends who have been through scary situations, even then, even right in the moments that I wouldn't have thought of myself being in a situation like that. So, yeah, definitely a privilege. I think I would say I've met many women traveling solo, and there definitely is a way for women to travel safely, uh, on their own without having some sort of a partner by their side all the time. But the considerations are very much different, right? Vastly different. There's a lot of content from women travelers, from solo women travelers out there, talking about all of the different things that they consider when it comes to booking, like you said, booking hotels, hanging out with people and stuff like that, that I think are super valuable as well. So finding a community of travel is really essential. And the last point I wanted to make is going back to finding like a community, is places like couchsurfing, places like Nomad List. To some extent, you can really kind of filter down if you want to find other women travelers, um, that you could travel with here and there, even if it's for a small group of time. I think relying on community is one of the best ways to stay safe. Definitely for women, but also for us as well, to some extent, right? Like if we're in places that may be a little bit more dangerous, perhaps, right? Like kind of traveling in community, and it's really valuable to staying safe and enjoying your time.
Well, for anybody who wants to travel the world and hang out with awesome people, I know a nice community that they can join. It's called the SAFAROTO
Absolutely.
Community.
Yes,
And
sir.
I'm very excited about um, creating the right tools and the right experiences for people and bring them together around the world. Um, yeah. Well, that's my passion. That's what I'm Excited about
and you,
creating in the world.
and those there's no one that's more qualified for this, I would say, than you. Obviously, being a digital nomad for I don't know, 7 years now, I believe, right? Going to 8, I guess. Also being super social, being like a really awesome person in general, dude, and like just being like, just caring about people and making sure that everyone's cool, everyone's safe, everyone's comfortable. Yeah, I mean, if that's the foundation for the community, which obviously is gonna be, I think that's gonna be highly successful. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that blossom. Obviously, and make I think we it can make a change in how we see the world, right? Like not just us as men, but women and people, anyone in between who needs help figuring out this crazy lifestyle. I think is gonna make a huge difference. So I'm very much looking forward to
Thank
to
you.
this beautiful community coming up, man. Yeah, I'm really
Yeah, it's
excited.
I've been thinking about it a lot, and I have finally over the last months been shifting my energy towards being more productive, as you know, and
Yeah,
that's another thing related to like working remotely. It's um, we in my case it's a little different because I haven't had a job in a while. I like to create and build things,
right.
and the same way when you're in a job and you want to be productive and you have structure and you want to get things done, it's also when you are an entrepreneur and you're doing your own thing, there is something about having a certain routine and being in a certain location and being able to focus. And for me, because I spent, I would say, maybe a few years on a semi sabbatical slash, just managing a few projects here and there without really putting in the time and energy that it requires to be able to create um, something new and get it off the ground, it's been a bit of a challenge for me to build that discipline again. And
Yeah.
so I feel like it took longer than I expected to build that discipline back. But as you know, when I set my mind to something, like whether it's a gym, working out, or doing certain things, it just, all right, great. Like once you get those daily habits in place, it's much easier to focus back. And I'm excited to create um, and build a new platform that can really help people looking for community while they're solo traveling.
I think also as you like think about crowdsourcing some of this, well, work in general, right? Like, you can have people suggesting different destinations, different activities, and stuff like that. I think it's really gonna, as the community grows, it's just gonna get easier and more powerful, right, on its own. Which I think is the beauty of it as well. Like, we don't need 20 autos, right, in order to build this massive community. We just need a really good platform, a really good set of people, right? People are the foundation of this
Yeah,
ultimately, and people are gonna start helping little by little and making this a beautiful and amazing project, right? So, yeah, I think to your point also about the discipline, I think it also is like a little bit of accountability here and there, right? Like even just talking about it with someone, like, hey, I'm working on this project, here's what I'm thinking, and stuff like that, really helps to kind of find that discipline again, right? Like
yeah, for sure.
being accountable to someone outside of yourself. So yeah, obviously we've talked about Safaroto for some time, and even in the more recent months, and I think it's helped both of us, right? Kind of go to hold each other
Yeah.
accountable, right? So
So there was one
yeah.
thing that I know you're working on with your partner, Love Ritual. Do you want to talk a little
Yep.
bit about that and what it's all about, why you started it, and what's your vision for it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So Love Ritual is it's a basically a company that we kind of started together, um, and basically it allows you to do a check-in with your partner. Um, our recommended frequency is once a week, so it just provides a format for you to do that check-in. Um, it provides some instructions, some prompts, things like that, so that people who may not be used to having this level of communication can do that more easily and more effective. Um, so yeah, it's right now it's a bit of on a prototype stage. Obviously, as you kind of grow, we're testing out the market, getting people to try it, understanding what it is that we need to change and what we need to focus. So right now, if anyone wants to try it out, it's loveritual.com, and I think eventually we're moving towards having more. in-person experiences. We're having more workshops, having more, retreats, right? Those kind of experiences where couples go to really upgrade their relationship, right? Like to really improve the communication, um, and those sort of things. So we've worked with therapists and coaches for a while now to try to refine this initial product. It's completely free. You don't need to pay anything to try it out. And from there, we're gonna take a lot of that feedback and build an entire, basically like relationship wellness company where it goes from in-person experiences to online experiences to you know ritual, right, consistent check-ins. We think that that's gonna make a huge difference. For us, it has. We started it from a need of making sure that our communication stays top notch, right, throughout our relationship. So we've refined it and kind of built this prototype with that in mind, and the fact that it helped us so much and it continues to help us till this day. So yeah, highly encourage people to check it out, and let us know their thoughts. So we're really excited about this launch.
Yeah, knowing the dynamic of your relationship with your partner and knowing your backgrounds, I think the two of you are the right people to start as well, and I look forward to being part of it. We've actually, with my partner, we've adopted. We have our own love rituals, and we have our own little
Yeah.
daily habits and we actually call it our love ritual. So whenever there is, some certain things that we do together on a regular basis to make sure that we're spending time together and having that quality time, we just say, oh, it's our love ritual time. So thank you for introducing that to our lexicon now, and we look forward to being part of many experiences in the future.
Yeah, and thank you for trying it out. Obviously, you've been a huge part of the conversations around Love Ritual for sure. Even when the spark came out, right? So yeah, I think it's really great to kind of bounce these projects off of each other in general. Like have someone to kind of keep you motivated, keep you grinding, right? So yeah, we're really excited for people to try it, um, and yeah, also really excited for Safaroto. I think we're making a lot of we're bringing a lot of healthy aspects to many parts of our lives, right? Travel, relationships, like they go together so much, but
Working
also
out.
so important.
Don't forget staying
Working
fit.
out, no, absolutely. Stay fit community. We're working out. So yeah, it's a beautiful, healthy ecosystem. I would say for sure that we have built here.
Yeah. Well, my friend Emiliano, it's been a pleasure running into you in Zagreb, in Croatia a few years ago. It's been an incredible privilege to spend time with you and hang out in so many places. Um, I feel very lucky to have you in my life. I value our friendship. I thank you for taking the time. I look forward to many more amazing experiences together across different parts of the world.
Absolutely, and yeah, likewise, man. I just want to say thank you for, opening up my horizons of this travel lifestyle. Right, ultimately, I've learned a lot from you during these 3 years, more or less, that I've been traveling. I guess 2 years since we met, but ultimately, you're a great person to be around, to travel with, to, you know, bounce off ideas off, and talk business, talk all of the things that we want to talk. So yeah, highly, highly, highly proud of our friendship, and looking forward to many more years of whatever comes, whatever that looks like for us in the future. I think neither way we're gonna be involved with each other one way or another for sure.
Wonderful. Well, it's a wrap for today. Thank you everybody for listening, and until next time.